One snort. That's all it took. On a perfectly ordinary Cleveland sports radio segment, a fan called in to Anthony Lima's 92.3 show and asked Andrew Berry, the general manager of the Cleveland Browns, whether Deshaun Watson could still be the future of this franchise. And before the words even finished leaving Lima's mouth, before Berry could open his mouth to respond with the careful, diplomatic, measured language that 6 years of front office experience had trained him to deliver, the fan on the other end of the line snorted. Not a polite chuckle, not an awkward laugh, a full, uncontrollable, audible snort. The kind that escapes your body before your brain can stop it. The kind that tells you exactly what someone actually thinks before they've had a chance to dress it up in professional courtesy. Berry didn't flinch. He kept right on talking, cool, composed, every word placed with the precision of a man who has been in NFL war rooms long enough to know that a single off-script syllable can become a headline by noon. But that snort? That snort said everything that Berry was too professional to say out loud. And it wasn't just one fan. That snort was Cleveland. Every single Browns supporter who has watched the practices, read the beat reports, tracked the offseason arc, and quietly drawn their own conclusions. That fan spoke for all of them in one involuntary, perfectly timed moment of human honesty. And here's the thing. If you go back and listen to that entire interview, not just for the words, but for the structure of the answers, the examples chosen, the moments of specificity versus the moments of philosophical vagueness, Andrew Berry was telling you the same thing the whole time. He just wasn't saying it out loud. Today, we're going to break down exactly what he said, why he said it the way he did, and what it actually means for Shedeur Sanders, for Deshaun Watson, and for the future of a franchise that has been waiting for a real answer at quarterback for longer than most of its fans care to remember. But before any of that makes sense, you have to understand why Berry was doing interviews in the first place. Andrew Berry didn't wake up one morning and decide to go on Cleveland radio for fun. General managers don't do that. They don't voluntarily sit down with sports talk hosts and open themselves up to live, unfiltered questions about the most sensitive personnel situation on their roster unless there is a very specific, very deliberate reason for doing so. And the reason here wasn't Myles Garrett. Garrett's situation had already been addressed, already been processed publicly, already been moved past in the organizational narrative. No, this media tour had one purpose and one purpose only: to get in front of the most combustible storyline the Browns have had in years before it got completely out of hand. Think about what this franchise has been through at quarterback in the last 3 years. Watson arrives with the most fully guaranteed contract in NFL history at that point, $230 million, fully guaranteed. The kind of financial commitment that doesn't just affect a roster, it reshapes an entire organization's identity, its draft strategy, its salary cap architecture, its relationship with its fan base. And then Watson got hurt and stayed hurt, and then hurt again. Emergency starters, journeymen, practice squad elevations. A franchise that had finally thought it solved its decades-long quarterback problem found itself right back in purgatory, except now with $250 million locked in and nowhere to run. Into that wreckage walks Shedeur Sanders, 5th-round pick, the kind of selection that happens quietly, that doesn't make the top of the draft broadcast, that most fan bases don't circle on their calendar. And then he starts 7 games. On a backup roster with limited weapons, a patched-together supporting cast, and the kind of game day chaos that would break most rookies, and he goes 3-4. And somewhere in those 7 starts, something shifted inside the building in Berea. The organization started to feel something it hadn't felt about a quarterback in a long time, something that organizational people are very careful about feeling too early, because hope at the quarterback position in Cleveland has a long and painful history of ending badly.
So now you have a fan base that is emotionally locked in.
You have a young quarterback who generated genuine organizational excitement in 7 starts. You have a veteran who the owner of the team publicly called a swing and a miss. You have a $230 million problem that cannot be traded or released without catastrophic financial consequences. And you have training camp approaching, with the whole football world watching to see how Cleveland handles the most delicate quarterback situation in the league. You don't stay quiet in that environment. You go on the radio, you go on TV, you sit across from Anthony Lima and Darryl Reuter, and you talk about it carefully, publicly, and with complete awareness that every single word you say is going to be dissected by every Browns fan in Northeast Ohio before the segment is even over. You do it because your fan base needs to hear from the man making decisions that he knows what he's doing, that there's a plan, that this isn't chaos, that the organization is in control of something that has felt very out of control for a very long time. And Barry did exactly that. He sat down and he talked. And if you weren't listening carefully, it sounded balanced. It sounded fair. It sounded like a GM professionally managing a genuine competition. But if you were listening the right way, if you were paying attention not just to what he said, but to how he said it, how much detail he offered here versus there, which answers he leaned into and which ones he navigated around, the picture that emerged was anything but ambiguous. Here is exactly what Andrew Barry said when Anthony Lima asked about Shedeur's progress this offseason. He said it was a great spring. He said the growth over the last 8 to 10 weeks had been tremendous. Then he went further back, all the way back to January and February, and talked about how Shedeur had spent the dead period, the time when coaches can't be in contact with players, attacking his specific weaknesses with the kind of self-awareness and personal discipline that you simply cannot teach. You either have that internal drive or you don't, and according to Barry, Shedeur had it in full. And then at the end of that answer, after all of those details in that entire development arc, Barry landed on one word to summarize all of it: phenomenal. The general manager of the Cleveland Browns sat on live radio and called his second-year quarterback's 6-month development arc phenomenal. Not promising, not encouraging, not trending in the right direction, which is the kind of careful, non-committal praise that front office people reach for when they want to say something positive without actually saying anything. Not showing real improvement or taking the right steps forward, the kinds of phrases that sound like compliments but leave every door open for a different outcome. Barry had all of those options available to him. He's a careful, measured, experienced front office professional who has spent 6 years learning exactly how to say the right things without saying too much. He said, phenomenal. That word doesn't appear in a GM's vocabulary by accident when he's talking about a player he views as a bridge or a backup or a developmental piece who might or might not get a real shot depending on how a veteran performs in the preseason. Phenomenal is the word you use when you've watched something that genuinely excited you and you're having trouble containing that excitement, even inside the constraints of professional public communication. It is a word that leaks through. And Barry, who clearly understood exactly what he was doing in every other part of that interview, let that word through anyway. Because here's what's even more telling than the word itself. He didn't just say phenomenal and move on. He built to it. He constructed a detailed, specific, timeline-driven narrative about Shedeur's development that went back 6 months, that cited the dead period, that acknowledged both the high moments and the communication issues without letting the communication issues define the narrative, and then he capped the entire thing with that one word. That is not how a GM discusses a player he has uncertainty about. That is not how you talk about a competition that is genuinely 50-50. That is how you talk about someone you've already decided is your guy, when the professionalism of your position requires you to maintain the language of an open competition, while every other signal your body and your word choice is sending points clearly in one direction. Barry is too good at his job to say Shedeur Sanders is our starting quarterback before training camp opens, but he is apparently not quite good enough to make phenomenal stay inside the building where it belongs. This is where the interview becomes genuinely revealing, because the contrast between how Barry discussed Shedeur and how he discussed Watson is not subtle once you see it. After all of that, after the January to February dead period detail, after the 8 to 10 week arc, after the organizational excitement, after phenomenal, Lima turned around and asked Barry directly whether Deshaun Watson could be the Browns' quarterback of the future if he won the competition and performed well this fall, whether an extension was possible, whether this organization still had genuine belief in the man they paid $230 million. And here is what Barry said. He said it's all on the table. He mentioned Sam Darnold's revival in Minnesota. He brought up Daniel Jones. He mentioned Geno Smith. He referenced Baker Mayfield's comeback in Carolina. He said you have to remain flexible and open-minded. He said he wouldn't rule anything out. Stop right there. Think about the quarterbacks Barry just cited as the framework for discussing Watson's potential future with this team. Sam Darnold, a player who was considered so finished that 2 franchises moved on from him before he found something in Minnesota. Daniel Jones, cut by the Giants after they had drafted him 6th overall and signed him to a massive extension, widely considered a cautionary tale about misreading quarterback talent. Geno Smith spent nearly a decade as a backup at a punchline before one unexpected run in Seattle temporarily changed the conversation. Baker Mayfield traded, released, and left for dead before finding his footing in Tampa Bay. These are not examples of sustained excellence. These are not examples of quarterbacks that organizations built around with confidence. These are comeback stories, resurrection narratives, the kinds of examples you reach for when you need to make the case that miracles are theoretically possible, not when you're making the case that you believe in what you have. Barry was essentially saying, look, strange things happen in this league. People write players off, and sometimes those players surprise everyone. We're not going to close that door completely. And on the surface, that sounds open-minded and professional and fair, but listen to what is underneath it. He is not saying Watson has been outstanding. He is not saying the organization is energized by what they've seen from him this offseason. He is not saying Watson has attacked his weaknesses or shown the kind of self-awareness and discipline that you cannot instill in a player. He's reaching for historical analogies about players the football world had largely moved past to make the argument that Watson's situation isn't necessarily hopeless. That is not the language of belief. That is the language of professional responsibility toward a complicated situation. There's a specific, unmistakable difference between the two, and Barry demonstrated both of them in the same interview within about 4 minutes of each other. When Barry discussed Shedeur, he gave you facts, specific dates, a development arc with a beginning, a middle, and an evaluation, organizational enthusiasm framed around tangible observations. When Barry discussed Watson, he gave you philosophy, openness, historical analogies about other players in other cities, the gentle suggestion that you shouldn't rule anything out because football is unpredictable. One of those responses sounds like a man who has found his quarterback. The other sounds like a man managing an expensive and emotionally complicated situation with as much grace and professionalism as the circumstances allow. One of the most strategically interesting moments in the entire interview came when Barry addressed how to interpret the spring practice reports coming out of Berea. Because those reports had been mixed, there were sessions where Shedeur looked spectacular, sharp, confident, connecting on deep balls in 11-on-11 that had people inside the facility genuinely excited. And there were also moments where communication broke down, where pre-snap issues surfaced, where the kind of timing and rhythm that takes years to develop between a quarterback and an offense showed its rough edges. And Barry knew those reports were out there. He knew that fans and media had been tracking every single rep like a stock ticker, assigning meaning to each good throw and each miscommunication, trying to build a picture of the competition in real time from fragments of information that are inherently incomplete. So he addressed it directly. He called it the day trader mentality, the instinct to evaluate each individual rep as if it were a data point that tells you the whole story, and he pushed back against it firmly. According to Barry, the organization views spring as an installation period, a growth period. They are not grading individual days, they are watching an arc. Players are going to struggle. Corrections are going to be made. That is the entire point of this time of year, to create the conditions under which a young quarterback can fail safely, learn from it, and develop the habits and instincts that will carry him through a full NFL season. Now, think about who that framing protects. It's not Watson. Watson is a 10-year veteran who doesn't need organizational cover for spring practice miscommunications. Watson's evaluation isn't about whether he understands the system. He's been in enough systems to absorb a new one. Watson's evaluation is about his physical recovery, his arm, his mobility, his ability to do the things that made him one of the best quarterbacks in the league before the injuries. Nobody is grading Watson on whether he's still learning the playbook. The day trader framing is about Shedeur. It is organizational language designed to prevent the media and the fan base from overreading individual practice moments in a way that creates external pressure on a young quarterback's development. Barry is essentially saying, do not let one bad session become the narrative. Do not let a pre-snap communication issue in May become the story that defines this competition. We are watching something bigger than any single day, and what we are watching, by his own account, has been phenomenal. That is a general manager protecting his investment, not a financial investment, a developmental one. The kind of investment you make in a player you have already decided is the answer, and whom you are now actively working to insulate from the noise that could disrupt his growth at the worst possible time. Here is another layer that Barry addressed during the interview, and it might be the most concrete evidence of all, because it doesn't depend on word choice or tone or the interpretation of a single adjective. It depends on tangible roster construction decisions that the organization has already made and cannot take back. Barry talked about the investments made around the quarterback position this offseason. Isaiah Bond entering his second season, the receiving core built around youth and speed, the backfield adding genuine depth, Harold Fannin Jr., already one of the most exciting young tight ends in the league, as a weapon in Todd Monken's system, a new head coach bringing a new offensive identity specifically designed to maximize what a modern, mobile, accurate quarterback can do. And then Barry framed all of it explicitly as a conscious organizational effort to build an environment that gives the quarterback the best possible chance to succeed. Think about what that means in practical terms. You don't reconstruct your entire offensive infrastructure, receivers, tight ends, running back depth, head coach, offensive system, for a bridge situation. You don't make those kinds of resource commitments, those kinds of draft capital expenditures, those kinds of systemic philosophical decisions for a veteran who might be your starter for 1 year while you wait for the real answer to arrive. That level of construction is what you do when you have already identified the quarterback you are building toward, and you are now building the world around him. Bond, at receiver, is 22 years old. Fannin, at tight end, is 23. The system Monken is installing is not a system designed to maximize what a 30-year-old veteran brings. It is a system designed to grow with a young quarterback over multiple seasons, to create the kind of consistent offensive identity that a franchise can build its entire culture around. When Barry listed those pieces and framed them as deliberate investments in the quarterback's success, he was not describing a competition. He was describing a building process. And building processes have a direction. They have a destination. And based on everything Barry said in that interview, there is one quarterback in Cleveland that represents that destination. There was one more moment in the interview that deserves its own conversation, because it was quiet and easy to miss, but it might be the most significant signal of all. Lima asked Barry directly about the Haslam comment. The owner of the Cleveland Browns had publicly called the Deshaun Watson acquisition a swing and a miss. That is an extraordinary thing for an owner to say about a sitting player on his own roster, a player who, by the way, is still under contract and still competing for the starting job. It's the kind of public statement that creates real organizational complexity, that puts a front office executive in an uncomfortable position, that demands some kind of response. And Barry's response was almost clinical in its precision. He said that the team's player evaluations and Todd Monken's roster construction are not influenced by public opinion. He said you deal with what you have and how players progress or do not progress, and then he moved on. What he did not say is just as important as what he did say. He did not push back on Haslam's framing. He did not say he disagreed with the characterization. He did not say Watson still had a lot to offer, or that the swing and miss framing was unfair, or that the organization still believed Watson could return to the form that made him one of the most dangerous quarterbacks in football. He acknowledged the existence of the public discourse, said it wouldn't affect internal evaluations, and then completely declined to defend Watson against the framing that the owner of the team had publicly applied to him. That is not what you do when you believe in a player. When a general manager believes in a player, when the organization has real internal conviction that a quarterback is their guy, they push back on the negative narrative. They don't accept the framing. They redirect the conversation. They find ways to reframe the public perception because they understand that the way a player is talked about publicly can affect how he's treated, how he's evaluated, how he approaches his own situation. Berry didn't do any of that for Watson. He offered a clinical non-response that essentially said, "The owner said what he said. It doesn't change how we evaluate players. Next question." Watson is not being protected in that building. He has been compartmentalized, acknowledged as a complicated situation that must be professionally managed, but not defended, not championed, not talked about with the kind of conviction that you attach to players you genuinely believe in. And that silence around Watson's potential and future is, in its own way, just as loud as phenomenal. Here is the complete picture, assembled from everything Andrew Berry said and everything he chose not to say during a single radio interview that most people probably half listened to while driving to work. The Cleveland Browns are in the middle of a genuine organizational rebuild, not a patch job, not another attempt to squeeze production out of aging pieces while hoping the contract situation resolves itself. A real, structural, generational rebuild, built around a young quarterback who the organization has already, based on every signal Berry said in that interview, internally identified as their franchise cornerstone. The entire offensive infrastructure has been reconstructed with that quarterback in mind. The system, the weapons, the developmental philosophy, the coaching structure, all of it points in one direction. Shedeur Sanders went from a fifth-round pick who nobody outside of die-hard Browns fans was particularly excited about, to a player his own general manager described as phenomenal after 6 months of individual development work, 7 rookie starts in impossible circumstances, and an offseason that apparently exceeded even internal expectations. Watson will compete, Berry made that clear, and there's no reason to doubt it. The evaluation will be real. The coaching staff will assess what Watson brings to the table with genuine professional rigor, because that is what this organization owes to its fan base and to its own credibility. Watson has real tools. He has experience. He has been in big games in big moments, and he understands what it takes to prepare for an NFL season at the highest level. If he walks into training camp and performs at a level that demands the starting job, that conversation will happen. But the way Berry discussed Watson's theoretical future, using comeback story frameworks, reaching for miracle narratives, offering philosophical openness rather than organizational conviction, does not sound like a team that is quietly hoping Watson wins this competition. It sounds like a team that is professionally honoring an obligation while already knowing which direction it's heading. And that direction was given away, not in a press conference, not in a formal announcement, not in the kind of bold organizational statement that gets written up in every outlet by noon, but in a radio interview where a general manager's word choice and a fan's involuntary snort told the whole story between them. Go back to that moment one more time. Lima asks the question, Watson, the future? An extension? The guy you just heard described as a swing and a mess by the man who signs the checks? After 20 minutes of phenomenal and organizational excitement in January to June development arcs and offensive infrastructure built around the quarterback's success, is Watson the future? And the fan snorts before his professional instincts could intervene. before his brain could catch up with the question and remind him that he was on live radio and that the polite, neutral, wait-and-see response was the appropriate one in this context. His body answered first, because somewhere in Cleveland, in every barbershop conversation and every group chat and every commute spent listening to sports radio, the actual football fans who have been paying attention to all of this have already processed what Barry confirmed in that interview. They know. They've known for a while. Barry just gave them the language to articulate it. Shedeur Sanders is the Cleveland Browns quarterback of the future. Andrew Barry never said that. He was too careful, too professional, too experienced to say it out loud before training camp opens and the formal evaluation process runs its course. But he said everything around it. He painted every wall of the room except the one with the door. And the snort told you which door opens to where. The competition is real enough. The evaluation will happen. July will bring training camp and pads and the first real competitive reps of the summer, and every session will be dissected and debated and discussed across every platform that covers this team. Watson will have his moments, Shedeur will have his struggles. The day-by-day narrative will swing back and forth the way it always does when a team is working through a genuine quarterback situation in public. But Barry already told you how to watch all of that. He told you to ignore the day trader instinct, to watch the arc instead of the individual days, to understand that the organization is seeing something in this young quarterback that has moved past promising and past encouraging and landed somewhere that a careful, experienced, word-conscious general manager reached for the word phenomenal to describe. Watch the arc and trust the snort. Now drop everything in the comments. Based on everything Barry said in that interview, the language, the detail, the contrast between how he talked about Shedeur versus how he talked about Watson, do you think this competition is already over before training camp even opens? Does a GM who chooses every word with surgical precision accidentally say phenomenal about a player he has genuine uncertainty about? And when July arrives and the pads go on in Berea, how much of what you're watching will actually be a competition and how much will just be the final chapter of a story that Barry already told you the ending to on a Tuesday morning radio show in Cleveland? This story develops every single day. Every update, every practice report, every signal from inside that building, it all arrives here first. Subscribe and hit the notification bell. You don't want to be the last one to hear what's already being said.